All right, good morning, Lakeview. Good morning, everyone. And Merry Christmas to everyone, too. We are continuing our study of the book of Genesis. Hi, Wayne. I love you, too. Okay. So we're continuing our study of the book of Genesis. We're going to cover the end of chapter 9 through the beginning of chapter 12 today, the calling of Abraham. The members of the implied audience of Genesis knew that their God had crushed the gods of Egypt embodied in the Pharaoh, and Genesis 1 through 11 explains why he could do so. The God of Israel is far more than just a tribal God. He is the one true God who made heaven and earth. So today we're going to be answering the question, why was Abram called? The bibliography. If you want my slides, I can email them to you. Or you can talk to Ray Glassman. He has my slides too. So our objectives today is to understand that all of mankind are related, to see how even nations can fall, and to understand the calling of Abraham as sort of a third creation event after the initial one and then the flood. So let us begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to come together to study your word and to let it dwell in our hearts, Lord, and let your word speak with us and be with us as we go out into the world, Lord, and let us be lights for you. In your name, amen. So, Noah's sons who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham later fathered Canaan. I want you to note, Canaan is mentioned right off the bat. These three were Noah's sons, and from these men the whole earth was repopulated. So we are all descended from one of those three brothers, probably all of them at this point, given just how genetics and populations work. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant and farm a vineyard. He drank some wine, got drunk, and lay down naked right in the middle of his tent. So immediately Noah gets drunk, while alcohol and wine is, in moderation is okay. Like God even says, like in Psalms 104, verse 15, and Ecclesiastes 9:7, that wine is a joy, but we're not to abuse it. And here, Noah abuses it. So right off the bat, creation is again off to a bad start. And then Ham, who fathered Canaan, again, Canaan is mentioned, saw his father's genitals and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took their father's cloak, laid it across both their shoulders, and walking backwards, they covered their father's genitals. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's genitals. When Noah sobered up and learned what his youngest son had done to him, and note, the order Shem, Ham, and Japheth is not the birth order. It's the order they relate to Israel. So Shem is the most important to Israel, being the descendants of him, then Ham because Canaanites and Egyptians and various other groups. And then Japheth is the one, all his tribes settled far away from the Israelites. So he said, Canaan is cursed. He will be the lowest of slaves to his relatives. He also said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave. May God make room for Japheth. May God live in Shem's tents, and may Canaan serve him. Noah lived 350 years after the flood, and Noah had lived a total of 950 years. He died. So it's interesting that Canaan is cursed, not Ham. And that is the question we should be thinking about with this passage. What happened here that caused Canaan to be the one cursed? And I would also like to point out that the Mesopotamian flood story, the goal of the main character is to find immortality, which Noah did not find. So this is one of the differences between the true version of events and the sort of pagan versions of it. Why is Canaan cursed? So we notice how Canaan is mentioned twice before he's even cursed. We see Noah builds a vineyard, which is a new garden, but one for a very specific purpose. And again, as we said, he's the first person to make alcohol and he gets drunk. Then we get the phrase, so my translation didn't use this phrase, but this is the more traditional way it's translated, Ham uncovered his father's nakedness. So what does that phrase mean? Leviticus actually defines it. So Leviticus 18:7 through 8 reads, "Neither your father's nakedness nor your mother's nakedness is to be exposed. She is your mother, and you are not to have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your father's wife. It is your own father's nakedness." So what happened in that tent with Ham is a sexual sin. I think he violated his mother, and thus shaming his father. And that is why Canaan, the product of that union, is the one that's cursed. Other people think Ham might have violated his father Noah himself and committed an act of homosexuality. Either way, a very horrible sexual sin happened in that tent. And that is what the author is wanting you to see. Because as we see right after they're exiled from the garden, Cain murders his brother, so we have a family sin, and here we have a different sort of family sin, a sexual one. So we're seeing just how the many different ways humans can hurt each other and how we are all broken. See, God has once again started over with this new attempt, and immediately we're already off to a very bad start. So, Genesis 10 in brief. Let's not really think about the genealogy in Genesis 10 as like a full, complete list of descendants. While there are actual people in it, most of it is really about tribes and how they relate to each other and what sort of clans came from the three different brothers. And so while the patriarchs of those tribes probably had those names, so they're probably named for real people, but really think of them more as just people groups. So the sons of Japheth filled the coastline around the Mediterranean and perhaps north around Anatolia and the Black Sea. We are given the least amount of information of these people since they are the ones farthest from Egypt and Moses when he's writing, and are the least relevant to the Israelites at this time. The sons of Shem primarily settled in the Fertile Crescent. The sons of Ham occupied northeastern Africa, the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, and the shores of the Red Sea, and thus come to have at least one group in Mesopotamia, as we'll see. And then the sons of Shem primarily settled the Fertile Crescent and Arabia. So Donald Wiseman concluded that the names suit an ancient context. It would not be unreasonable to assume that the information in this chapter could therefore be known to Abraham. In all, there are 70 nations. That's a very important number, 70 nations. That is going to tie back into the very end of Genesis when Jacob and his family moves into Egypt. They number 70 people, and Deuteronomy makes a point about that. All right, so here's a map. I hope this shows up well. I'm looking on the back projector and it looks really terrible. Oh yeah, so you can see Shem's descendants are in yellow and Japheth in red and Ham's are in green. And we'll not go over all the names, there's so many of them. But there's a little excerpt to show just how many Canaanite tribes are kind of named because of the importance of them to the Israelites going forward. Whoa. All right, so I think this skipped just a bunch of, what happened? All right, there we go. So who is Nimrod? We get a departure in the middle of all these tribes to talk about this guy named Nimrod. So Cush fathered Nimrod, who became the first fearless leader throughout the land. Now, he's not actually Cush's direct son. He's like a grandson or a great-grandson, I believe. He became a fearless hunter in defiance of the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a fearless hunter in defiance of the Lord. His kingdom began in the region of Shinar with the cities of Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. From there, he went north to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, and Calah. I mean, there's two big cities we're going to hear about all the time in the Old Testament, Babylon and Nineveh, and he is connected to both of them. Along with Rezin, which was located between Nineveh and the great city of Calah. So Nimrod's name means we shall rebel. So his name alone is just saying this is why he's defiant to the Lord. And I want to point out this word hunter. We're going to focus on that, but mighty hunter or fearless hunter as it's translated in this version. It means the Hebrew word gibora bares, which means a sort of a champion warrior or a tyrant. It is the same term used of Goliath, the champion, in 1 Samuel 9:1, as well as the mighty men who were of old in Genesis 6:4. So this is bringing us back to the Nephilim and the flood event. So the Septuagint reads in verse 8, Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first to be a giant on the earth. The first of a new generation of Nephilim is, I think, what Genesis is getting at here. In Antiquities 1, verses 113 through 114, Josephus writes that Nimrod was the ruler of Babel who instigated what happened there. So this is an idea that this is the other reason Nimrod is introduced to us right before the Tower of Babel event. He is in Shinar where the Tower of Babel event happens. He might very well be the person that thought this would be a great idea. So Nimrod is sort of our bridge from the divine transgression of Genesis 6, 1 through 4 to our next divine transgression, the Tower of Babel. Nimrod, again, is not a tribe, but one of Ham's descendants through his son Cush, who arose at some point. He began his campaign in Sumeria, which the Bible usually calls Shinar, conquering 3 cities in the south before moving north to conquer nations in what later became Assyria. The text implies he profanes or defies the Lord by making war. He is a hunter of men. He is our first warlord. Kings of this time were often shown as hunting dangerous animals such as lions or wild oxen. Further, this hunting contains the idea of slaughter in Hebrew. Through the city of Babylon, though the city of Babylon does not actually exist at this time when he would have been around, it is located in Sumar or Shinar, as we see in Daniel. And the idea of what Babylon means is anachronistically included in the text to just sort of really drive home that this is where it happened in this region. So there is a historical figure known as Sargon of Akkad, the oldest known empire builder found in archaeology, and who lived a few hundred years before Abraham's time. Sargon of Akkad, or Sargon the Great, was king of Sumar and Akkad, was from Kish, which is associated with Cush. While the bulk of Cush's descendants settled south of Egypt, Nimrod's tribe settled in southern Mesopotamia, leading to 2 different Cushes being found in the Bible. Akkad becomes Sargon's capital and the heart of the Akkadian Empire he founded. Sargon ruled over all the cities Nimrod conquered. Sargon was also active building projects in Assyria, just as Nimrod built cities up in Assyria. Why don't they have the same name? Like, why isn't there like the Hebrew version of Sargon? Well, Sargon is a king's name, so it's probably not the one he was born with. And Nimrod is a pejorative name to tell us what sort of a man he is. Because remember, there's just a limited space when you're writing on the old material. So you just want to be concise. Giving someone a name that tells you exactly what this person is a lot smarter than having to give more detailed information. But there's some other ideas of who Nimrod is. Some people think he's Gilgamesh from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Others think he's a figure in mythology called Ninurtu. But I think Sargon of Akkad is a really close fit to him. This is a relief we have of Sargon of Akkad. You can see he is on a horse. He's using a bow. He's hunting in this relief. There was a time when the entire earth spoke a common language with an identical vocabulary. The rabbis will say this is Hebrew. They say Hebrew is the language that was spoken from the very beginning. As the people migrated westward, they came across a plain in the region of Shinar and settled there. So this is the heart of the Fertile Crescent. This is where we know the first cities arose. They told each other, come on, let us burn bricks thoroughly. They used bricks for stone and tar for mortar. That's exactly how buildings are built in Mesopotamia. They have no stone, but they have lots of mud. So they use that material. Then they said, come on, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its summit in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered over the surface of the whole earth. So God told Noah, be fruitful and multiply, as he told Adam and Eve. They are supposed to spread out across the earth, not stay here. And further, building a name is trying to usurp God, right? I mean, there's a reason the rabbinical Jews like to call God Hashem these days, the name, right? This is name theology is a very important thing in the Old Testament. Why things are called a name, people who are trying to take a name, right? So they're trying to name themselves and make themselves important more than God. However, the Lord descended to look over the city, the tower that the humans were building. So God is up in heaven, right? I want you to picture this. He's up in heaven, and there's something going down on earth. And God is making a point that what's happening is actually so insignificant that he can't actually see it from heaven. He has to come down and get a really close look. While the people building the Tower of Babel think it's this impressive object that's going to make them so great, to God it's so tiny. It's like, what's going on the ground? I have to bend over and take a look. The Lord said, "They are one people with the same language for all of them, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they have a mind to do will be impossible for them." I mean, I'm thinking about our age. Like everyone, English is, the lingua franca. Everyone who's, doing science, who's doing technology, they're all speaking English, and look at what we're doing now, right? We're trying to make artificial intelligence. We're trying to, put people's brains in computers. All this stuff that we're trying to do. We're trying to find immortality. So this is exactly the sort of stuff that God knew we would get up to if we all were united. And we get up to mischief, don't we? So come on, let's go down there and confuse their language so they won't understand each other's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the surface of the whole earth, so that they had to stop building the city. Therefore it was called Babylon. And Babel is just the Hebrew word for Babylon. So it's only here in this passage that you'll ever see it translated as Babel, just because it sounds like the English word for babble, to say it's nonsense stuff. So it's a little coincidence in English that we can have this word play. Therefore it was called Babylon, because the Lord confused the languages of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them over the surface of the entire earth. And in the Hebrew, there is a pun there, because Babel is Babylon, but Balal is to mix. So Babel gets Balal. So it's a little wordplay in the Hebrew there. Yeah.
James, how long do they think God allowed until he intervened? Is it years?
It probably was years to build it up to a height. I don't know. I mean, there is in Babylon is the location of the largest ziggurat we've ever found, which is currently a swamp and in ruins. And it definitely was in the mind of at least post-exilic Jews, or around that time of comparing it. There is some things added into the Torah that make allusions to the ziggurat in Babylon, but those are more in like other books.
Okay.
But yeah, probably a long time. I also want to point out that in the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, when God scatters the people, it says there were 70 angels that God put in charge of the 70 nations, and they cast lots for which angel would get which people group. So that's just something that was in the mind of Second Temple Jews. So the Tower of Babel leads to our third divine transgression of Genesis. The first is what Satan does in the garden. The second are the sons of God who slept with the daughters of men that caused the flood. Now, while the tower is a human sin of trying to make themselves a name, i.e. supplant God, what follows will be another divine transgression, because as we read, that should be read, not ready, I'm sorry, in Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, he's talking about right here at the Tower of Babel, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. Now, older translations might read the sons of Israel, making an allusion to the 70 souls that went down into Egypt. But we have in the Septuagint, it says angels or sons of God. And we also have a fragment from the book of Deuteronomy we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 4Q37. Deuteronomy, it's an older Hebrew text that agrees with the reading in the Septuagint. So there is some indication that God divided these nations. He said, you want to reject me, you want to supplant me, so I'm going to give you to my lesser creations to watch over you, and I'm just going to take one particular group and focus my attention on them. And there is some disagreement in Second Temple Judaism if this is a punishment, like these angels were supposed to just lead them further into sin, because, like when God says, if you keep sinning enough, God will just leave you to it, right? That's what you want, is sort of that idea. But there's others who thought that these angels were supposed to still guide them, to still recognize that God is the proper ruler, and that they failed and were corrupted and started to delight in being worshipped themselves. So Romans 1:18-25 talks about how God gave humans over to our pursuit and ruling. That's what I was talking about, which is an allusion to the Tower of Babel. So humanity is parceled out to the divine beings, the sons of God, to rule over them, while he claimed Abraham and formed a nation of priests for his own allotment. This agrees with sort of the territorial language of Daniel 10:13, where the angel that went to come speak with Daniel had to contend with the prince of the kingdom of Persia, I think for like 3 weeks. And this is also why Paul writes about powers, principalities, and dominions. He used very territorial rulership language for the demonic forces that oppose God. So what went wrong? God put these supernatural beings over the nations. If we look at Psalm 82 for a clue of exactly what went wrong with these angels, in verse 1, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. So that's lesser Elohim. So God is in the same council we see in Job, and he is as it says in verse 6, God said to them, "You are gods, sons of the Most High," so they're B'nai Elohim, all of you. He is condemning them for being unjust rulers who show partiality to the wicked. They are not protecting the weak and delivering them from evil. They are condemned to die like men, and in the end, God shall inherit all the nations. These supernatural beings did not rule their people wisely, but gave themselves over to favoring the wicked. They were seduced by worship. So this is the state of the world when Jesus is born. All the nations have been given out to these lesser angels who have rebelled, who are leading people astray with sin. This is why during the temptation of Jesus, like in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, that Satan offers Jesus to have rulership of the world. Satan can do this because he has territorial rights to the world, because it's been given out. All right, that temptation would not work if Satan couldn't actually deliver on the goods, right? Jesus would know, "No, Satan, you don't have the power to give me the world." That's not what Jesus says. So and that leads us to Pentecost. So everyone knows what happens at Pentecost. When the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place, and suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as of fire appeared to them and rested on each of them. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. So the divided languages are now done away with. All right, we have the apostles being able to speak in every tongue to all the people. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at the sound, the multitudes came together, and they were bewildered, because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed and astonished, saying, "Are not these all who are speaking Galileans?" So they have a pretty hick accent, is another thing you should understand about the apostles. And how is it that we hear, each of us in his own native language? Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia. And that's just Turkey. When you see Asia in the Old Testament, it just means Turkey. Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God. Luke is telling us where all these people are from, and they're from all over the world, right? That is something Luke wants you to pay attention to. This thing just jumped again. All right, so this is a map of where all these people are from. And it looks suspiciously like the map of the nations in Genesis 10. So the nations are scattered after the Tower of Babel to fill up all those places. Now they have come back together, and they're being united once more because God, who divorced himself from all these people, he is now taking them back. And that is the apostles' mission. That's our mission, to take back the world for God. So we have 10 generations from Seth to Abram, as we have 10 generations from Adam to Noah. Eber is an important name from which derives our term Hebrew. So Hebrews are the sons of Eber. We have quite a few generations to Abram, so be careful if you're in any ancient sources and you hear mentions of Hebrews, because there are more than just Israelites that are Hebrews, so they might not be talking about our particular group. They could just be talking about other descendants of Eber that are nomads wandering around. In the year Eber's son Peleg was born, the earth was divided. This is verse 10:25. There's a lot of speculation about what this means. Most believe that it's when the Tower of Babel happened, because we have Peleg mentioned both before and after the Tower of Babel, sort of giving us an A-B-A chiastic structure. But there are other theories that this is a record of some seismic event. Dan has a really interesting theory about that. I didn't have time to really research it, but you can talk to Dan. It's really interesting. But the name Peleg means either watercourse or division. And his brother Jokta, which is mentioned, means the younger or the smaller, and has the sort of connotation of being someone who's humble. And then we come to Terah, who has 3 sons, Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And we come to an end of another genealogy where there's 3 sons. The Cain's line ends at Lamech, who has 3 sons. Seth's line ends at Noah, who has 3 sons. There's something there. We got a little trinity of individuals over and over again. I don't know why. It's just something to note, something to think about. So Haran has a son named Lot, then dies in the presence of his father Terah, which happens in Ur of the Chaldeans. While here, Abraham and Nahor took wives, Sarai and Milcah, who is the daughter of Haran, and this appears to be a different Haran than Nahor's brother, because this Haran is the father of Iscah and not of Lot. Sarai's parentage is not given. Sarai means princess or queen, and Milcah also means queen, and their names are also popular Mesopotamian goddesses. I believe Milcah is the consort to Tammuz. So it's very common for people to name their children after gods in this time. And don't forget, Abraham's family is kind of pagan at this point anyways, if you dig into the sources. So don't be all thrown that Sarai is named after a goddess. Also, Sarai is also infertile. That's very important. That's why God chose Abraham and Sarai, because she is infertile. Now, Terah leaves Ur, possibly because of Haran's death. And the narrator tells us they are heading to Canaan, but it doesn't seem like they actually know it. This seems to be the patriarch, Abraham's father, is the one who is taking them back north to possibly where they're from, because they head to Haran, which is, again, probably where they originally came from, since it's the name of Terah's son. It's named for the town. And here, Terah dies. It's in the next chapter, Abram is called to leave Haran. And if you do not read Genesis carefully, it seems like Terah dies, then Abram leaves. But in fact, Terah is 70 when Abram is born and lives to be 205. So Abram would then be 135 when he leaves to Canaan, yet 12:4 tells us that Abram is 75. So Terah would only be 145 and still has a good 60 years left in him. Genesis sometimes just likes to wrap things up. Terah is done in the story. He's not needed anymore, so we're just giving what happened to him and then moving on so we can start Abram's story. So there's a debate of which Ur Abraham is from. There is one Ur in southern Mesopotamia, and at least one Ur, known as Ur or Urfa, in northern Mesopotamia near the Iraq-Turkey border. And that's where Haran is. So Haran's very close to this Ur. So which Ur is the one Genesis is talking about? Well, Genesis calls it the Ur of the Chaldeans. So this is an anachronism because the Chaldean as a tribe didn't exist during the time of Abraham. They lived in southern Mesopotamia, though. So this would be a later editor trying to clear up where Abram was at. This is the best explanation that a later Israelite scribe added this to clear up any confusion of which Ur is being talked about. There is good archaeological evidence to support nomads migrating from southern Mesopotamia up to northern Mesopotamia and back down. Again, so Terah and his family might have dwelt in Ur, but since they were pastoralists or herdsmen, they might have camped around it instead of lived in the city. In the early second millennium, so that would be between 2000 and 1600 BC, pastoralist tribes ranged far and wide. We learned this from the Mari archives, which is an Amorite city located in northern Syria, that there was a constant churning of nomads going into southern Mesopotamia, not liking it, coming back north. So I think that's what happened. I think Terah, like his son died there. He doesn't like this place, so he takes his family back home. And then once they're back home, then Abram actually gets the call to go to Canaan. So, because a lot of people debate, like, why, if he's in southern Mesopotamia, why do they go north and then come south instead of just going straight to Canaan from southern Mesopotamia? Why are they going to this place called, Haran? So I think this is the best way to understand the data. So, I have more, sorry. So many pastoralists who penetrated the mainly agricultural land, so I talked about this, there's this churn of people that come down and then go up all the time we see in this time period. It would have been a 2-month journey from the southern Ur to Haran, so that's 10 miles out a day. So Terah and his forebears have names common in occurrence of the places and names in northwest Mesopotamia, which implies that that's where they had originally settled, like Eskar Haran and Nachor are referenced in the Mari archives at this time. So this implies that northern Mesopotamia is their true homeland and why they returned there after leaving Ur. So why does all this matter to us? Why did all these 11 chapters we've been going through the last 4 weeks matter to Christians? This is kind of explaining where the tribe of Israel came from, right? Well, these 11 chapters are the setup to why Abram is chosen and why he needs to bless all the nations, which finds its ultimate fulfillment in Christ and the church. These first 11 chapters show us men failing over and over again. Brother kills brother. There's murder, there's sex, there's selfishness that consumes men. Even the ground is cursed by our sin. Creation is in pain, it needs healing. These 11 chapters give the Israelites the worldview, the stories through which they can view reality and understand why the world needs redemption. It also gives Christians the same worldview. So like the opening of an essay, Genesis 1 through 11 lays out the problem that the rest of the Old and New Testament are out to solve, culminating in Revelations. So now we come to Abram's story. And here the whole style of Genesis changes. So the prologue is over, and now we're entering what's called the ancestor epics of Abraham, Hagar, Jacob, Esau, Joseph, and Lot. The ancestral epics are a way for people to understand how they came to be in their present circumstances. For the Israelites, it's how they ended up in Egypt and why they need to return to Canaan. Abraham is called to go to a foreign land, to be an alien there. Being an alien in a strange land is the theme of Genesis. As Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden into a strange world that's foreign to them. As Cain was banished to be an outlaw, separated not just from his family and thus humanity, but even from God. Genesis 4:13-14 says, Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." See, Cain is like saying, this is worse than death, what you're doing to me, God. Noah and his family watched the old world destroyed and have to set foot into a new world. And that world has fallen into disharmony. Mankind is not united but fractured. And Abraham is cast into a broken world in need of redemption to be a blessing for everyone. So, now the Lord said to Abram, "Go to your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." See, in the Tower of Babel, they were trying to make their own name great. God is making Abram's name great. "I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to a place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At the time the Canaanites were in the land. So the oak of Moreh literally is the teacher's oak. This seems to be a sacred spot, perhaps where like a priest or a teacher would, he would sit under the tree and people would listen to him speak, right? And so this is a holy spot. And Abram recognizes that this place has some holy significance. So then the Lord appeared to Abram. This is another reason why it's pretty holy, because the Lord appeared there, and said, "To your offsprings I will give this land." So Abram built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So he built one altar at the oak of Moreh, which is in Mamre. The Genesis doesn't say here, but this is at Mamre. And then he moves to another place called Bethel, and he builds another altar. This implies that he is planning to spend time in this area. You don't just build an altar. This is not a simple thing. You're just lugging a bunch of stones. You're sort of piling them up. You make a little sort of platform like what we have behind here, and then you built an altar on top of that. So it's not just like something you slapdash together. This took probably weeks of labor. I don't know, depending on how many people he had and how available the stone was. And then Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. So he's building these altars. So this is, I think, the territory that he's going to be wandering through with. He follows his herds through the season. So he wants to have altars at different spots where he's going to be going. So I think what it is going to be here. And by the way, do you notice God didn't tell him to go to Canaan? God just told him to leave, and Abram just seemed to know where to go. And then once he got there, God told him, this is where you're going to establish things. So that's something interesting. This is not an easy journey, by the way, going from Haran to Yes. Yeah, the place I will show you.
So it sounds like
Okay, that's fair.
every day saying that way.
True.
Okay, you reach the top of this ridge, that's the there.
It's funny you mentioned ridge because he had to drop the goal on height to get here. So that is not an easy trip. But yeah, so Dan is saying that God, like day by day, was guiding him, kind of like, I would say, like the pillar that guided the Israelites through the desert. I think that would be a good analogy. Thank you, Dan. I hadn't really thought about that yet. Sure. Yes. Yeah, this is where Canaan's... Well, his curse is to serve the descendants of Shem. And God didn't curse Canaan, by the way. Noah cursed him. So just keep in mind that just because someone is cursed, you got to see who is doing the curse. So Noah is the one cursing. And he, as the patriarch in this time, cursing someone, that is a big deal. So, but don't think necessarily that God cursed him, but Noah did. It's all right. Yeah.
And the curse was on the person, Canaan, not the land.
Yeah. It's just, the land is called Canaan because the Canaanites settled there. It is on Canaan, his descendants. And, you know what Canaan means? By the way, it means to serve. Is an interesting thing in Hebrew, so. Yeah, kneeling, yeah, sort of a kneeling, serving thing. I got it. I should have mentioned it. I kind of skipped it in my notes here. Yeah, Canaan, it means to bow down, specifically. The verb kana, which Canaan seems to be derived from. So we're going to have a discussion about what it means to be a man of faith, but I just wanted to show you something. This is the excavation at Mamre that was uncovered. So this is a lot of ruins here. There's a guy standing in there if you can make him out. I don't know how well this is, but he's a little guy that's in there. That's about a city block is about how big this is. Yeah, so this is a drone shot taken down. I took this off a YouTube video from an archaeologist, but this is the site at Mamre that they excavated, and I'm showing this because this is some stuff to give you some clarification. So the red markings is an Islamic mosque that was built there, and then beneath that they found a Byzantine church that was built there. Then you see the green, right, that outlines the wall that's built around the site. That was built by Herod the Great to enclose this site because this site was considered a holy site to the Israelites because this is Mamre where Abraham settled. See that blue rectangle there? That is the remains of an altar that dates back to the early 2nd millennium. That might be the very altar Abram built that we just read about. And if you see that black circle with the red circle around it, that is a giant hole in the bedrock where a tree grew. It grew up through the bedrock and broke it apart. And there's a couple other holes scattered through here. There's also a spring in the lower left corner that gave water to the site. But you see that Mamre is known as the Great Trees of Mamre. You'll see this in Genesis a couple times. By the time we come to Constantine, he sent people to investigate the site, and they found it, and they found that the Romans had cut down the trees and put pagan idols in those places, which is why there are no trees there today. But what does it mean to be a man of faith? Let's just spend the rest of the lesson just sort of talking about Abram and what you think that means, what the story means to you, or if you have any other questions for what we discussed today. Yes, Dan.
So I always translate this word as trust instead of faith, because the English word faith seems to get attached to a set of ideas, and trust is always attached to a person. So a man of trust in God is someone who is doing something in his life for God that he would not do if God was not there.
Yeah, so Dan is talking about how he likes the word trust over faith because you trust a person, all right? And so that means you're putting your faith in a person, in this case, in God to deliver what he promised. Yep, Keith.
So to me, it means that we don't understand everything, but we have faith. And an example is that you drink water out of your faucet. Do you know where that comes from and how it's been cleaned? Well, being an engineer, I've seen many sites and I understand how it works, but most people don't. But they have faith when they turn the faucet on that they can drink it.
Yeah, so Keith.
That's the kind of faith that we have in God, is we don't understand everything, but we're trusting and we have to believe it.
Yeah, so Keith's point is that we don't necessarily understand everything that God wants us to do, but we have faith that it'll, work out. That, like, when you turn on the faucet, to get water, a glass of water, you don't know exactly how that water got to you. You don't know what's been necessarily done to the water to make it drinkable. You hope it's drinkable, right? There's the faith, yeah.
And what that illustrates is that faith and trust is not just a mental assent, it leads to a reaction of doing something.
Right, so Miss Jackie's comment is that faith and trust is not a mental activity, but it is. It should cause you to do something, to react to it, to act. You shouldn't just be like, I trust, but then I don't, do anything to show that I trust. As it says in James, if you don't have works to go with your faith, then do you really have faith, right?
I'd say could be the word that accumulates trusting and obeying.
Okay, so yeah, you're talking about trusting and then obeying. So he trusted God and he showed that trust by obeying, by going into a strange land. And this is a dangerous time. Like, Canaan is like the place where caravans go to get robbed. It was a very lawless place. There wasn't a lot of political structure there. There's a lot of just little villages and little mini cities and a lot of empty terrain where things can go badly for you. Yes, Dan.
The library that they uncovered there about the time of Abraham, a little before, had a statement of a contract to rent a wagon. Like we have car rentals today, and just like today, they have stipulations about where you can take the wagon. We can't drive a rental car from Washington State to Ensenada. It's not allowed on the rental contract. Their rental contract did not allow them to take the wagon to Canaan.
Yeah.
It was just too dangerous a place to go. That's exactly where God took Abram. The cities had come up, Jericho and the others had come up after the flood, gotten big and powerful, and then collapsed and decayed. This was now a lawless land.
Yeah, so we started off talking about like the Akkadian Empire. The Akkadian Empire had collapsed by this point. There was a whole power vacuum in Sumeria and Assyria to begin with. This is why nomads can just wander where they want in this time period, because there's not a lot of political control over these territories, which means they're very lawless, yes. As we notice, when Jacob splits his caravan into 3 parts, because he's worried about his brother Esau, attacking them, that is something we see in the records that other people did, to basically, like, what I have is so valuable, I'm willing to lose 1/3 of my caravan as sort of a cost to doing business to get down to Egypt through these lands, and that they would do that, break up their caravans and I guess you just roll the dice to see if you're in the lucky caravan or not. Yeah. Any other comments or questions before we wrap things up?
Trust and faith
Trust and faith are
are synonymous,
synonymous, yeah.
and we don't always see that connection.
Right. Faith is a very maligned word these days. Like it implies like you're just a dumb person that just trusts blindly in something, and that's not how we should think about faith.
Noah cursed Canaan right after he found out that Ham saw Dakota was naked. How did Noah know that his wife, you said that Canaan was a product of that sexual family, Ham came in. How did Noah know his wife was pregnant? How did he know she was going to have a boy? How did he know that her name was going to be Canaan?
Well, we don't really know that sort of time elapsing. It's how much time had passed since the flood. These things aren't really told to us in this time period. We're just giving sort of the bare bones of the story that we need to know. So it's possible that Canaan did already exist and that it was Noah was the one violated, not his wife. So that is a possibility. But I think it's the fact that Canaan is cursed, not Ham. That is, I think, the clue to...
Said that Canaan was already born and the reason why Noah cursed Canaan is because God already blessed Ham, Seth, and Japheth.
Okay, so she said that she read in a study that because God had blessed Ham, Shem, and Japheth, Noah wasn't going to curse them, so he cursed Ham's firstborn Canaan. That's a possibility. Another thing is cursing someone's firstborn is maybe even worse than cursing them themselves because you're saying your descendants are going to diminish and not that. So that is also a possibility, yes.
I would add commitment to that statement. I think we are to be a person of faith, that we have to commit ourselves to God. We have to hold ourselves to God.
Yep, so commitment is also something that's involved in faith, that we're committed to God. It's a relationship. God is doing his part, and we have to do our part to keep the relationship healthy. And that's part of what active faith is, yeah. Any other comments or questions? All right, so next week, read Genesis 12, verse 10 through chapter 15. And we're going to end with a prayer. Lord, thank you for this time together to study your word and to let it dwell in our hearts, Lord. And just bless us all that are here, Lord, and let us go out into the world and be faithful to you, to be committed to you, and to put our trust into you, Lord. In your name, amen.